Mr. Ambassador, you were in Uzbekistan as an ambassador during 1997, 2000, and this is when the Tashkent had its first bombings in 1999. Do you recall those events?
I recall those events very well. I was then the American ambassador, and we spent a great deal of time and effort with the Uzbek authorities to improve the security in Uzbekistan, and particularly presidential security. It was a great shock for the Uzbeks. It was a great shock for the Americans. You must remember that this was before 2001, and the idea of terrorism of that kind was new to us as well. We learned a great deal from that event, and it was a very important moment in Uzbek-American relations.
Did your work change after that? Did you have to work differently after those events?
Not after those events, but as security became more important to the American government, even in a safe place like Uzbekistan, I found myself obliged to take more precautions. There was a 6-month period when Mr. bin Laden had a contract out to kill me, and at that point I had security coming from America. But mostly I was lucky because I didn't have to worry nearly as much as the ambassadors do now.
The official story of the Uzbek government of those events was that the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan staged those attacks. But then later on there were other stories implicating the government in those events. Did you get different information other than the government of Uzbekistan?
I have no doubt that the attacks on President Karimov were the result of a plot by the IMU, and I must say they did it with a good deal of sophistication and came very much closer to getting Mr. Karimov than we would have liked. I have no reason to believe that this plot was produced by the Uzbek authorities.
So did the Uzbek government's policy on security change after that?
Yes, they became much more conscious of security. Presidentskaya Trasa became more heavily secured, and in general security was much more complicated. Think of the airport after that.
But did it lead to higher security in the country overall?
I think so. I think it did. I'm not sure that it was necessarily more successful, but it led certainly to more obvious security.
Because there are advocates of repressive policies, more restrictive policies of people who put security above anything else. What do you say to those people? Is that a justified measure?
I don't think you can make blanket statements that apply to all countries around the world. And you cannot make statements that attribute to one country a unity of view. It's true that the Americans are very strong about giving people more freedom, but the American government and other American authorities have taken in the last few years many steps to restrict our freedom, and most of those steps have come with the consent and agreement of the American people. It's the same thing in Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan was, and I expect still is, a country that is more willing to accept authority than is the United States. And as the situation changes, so too must security. I'm very sorry about it, but it's a fact of modern life.
The Halloween attacker this year in New York was from Uzbekistan, Saifullah Saipov. And unfortunately, this is not the first case where Uzbeks were involved in terrorist attacks. There were cases in Turkey, in Russia, in Sweden. Why do you think we're seeing more and more Uzbeks being involved in terrorism?
I don't think it's specifically Uzbeks, although there are some. But throughout Central Asia, and throughout, indeed, much of the Muslim world, you have a situation in which there are lots of young people, young males, who are educated in a way that their parents were not, and for whom the social structure has changed. In the case of young Uzbeks, Marxism-Leninism no longer offers anything. They don't understand the West, and that offers nothing to them because they don't know it. And for them, Islam, and particularly the more aggressive forms of Islam, are extremely attractive. And many of them go to Pakistan and elsewhere to study Islam, and some of them become radicalized. But it is not a uniquely Uzbek problem. You have it all over the Muslim world, and indeed elsewhere. It happens in the United States to people who are not necessarily Muslims. It's a fact of modern life.
But Saipov, who came to the United States 7 years ago, would you say that he was radicalized here in America?
Yes, I think he was.
How?
I'm not an expert on Mr. Saipov, but obviously he...
But how would one become radicalized in a more prosperous and freer country like America?
Because he is looking for certainties, and if he goes to the mosque and meets with imams who are preaching a more radical form of Islam, he may find it attractive. And if he has few other outlets for his thoughts, he may indeed radicalize himself and decide that he is going to make his contribution to the Islamic Revolution. It's neither particularly Uzbek nor particularly American. It happens everywhere. So
it's not just poverty or social injustice that some suggest are main factors for radicalization, right?
Poverty and social injustice certainly play a major role, but it's not the only thing.
President Trump said that he was going to close down the diversity lottery program, which is also known as Green Card. Do you think that's the right decision?
No.
Will that contribute to more security?
In the United States?
Yes.
I doubt it. The diversity program is an excellent example of all of the right things about America. We take anybody. We take anybody who wants to come, practically anybody who wants to come, and we say to them, you are now here, you are now American. What we want from you is to accept American mythology and speak English, or at least English and Spanish, and on that basis we will take you at your word and you can do whatever you want.
When was the last time you went to Uzbekistan?
About 3 years ago. I was what is called in American a talking head for a Smithsonian Institution group. I accompanied the group and lectured to them about Uzbekistan. You
have probably heard about the changes in Uzbekistan.
I have.
What do you make of them?
I think most of them, I think all of them that they have been announced are desirable. They go in the directions that a series of American ambassadors and other Western ambassadors have tried to suggest that Uzbekistan should take. They are perhaps going more slowly than we would have preferred, but in comparison to the policies that the Uzbek government adopted immediately after the Soviet Union collapsed, they are going in exactly the right directions. Things like improving the economy, improving communications, ending the necessity to get an exit visa for Uzbek citizens, announcing that tourists, foreign tourists may come without a visa in advance, convertibility of the Uzbek sum. Those are all steps in a desirable direction. Do you foresee these changes in Uzbekistan materializing in improved relations with the United States? If they are implemented, yes. And what were the relations between the two countries when you were there as an ambassador? When I was there as an ambassador, both the Americans and the Uzbeks, indeed all of the Central Asian countries, and we were only coming to grips with the fact that it was a new world. We wanted to help we wanted to do things for the Uzbeks. They wanted to do things for us. Relations were easy. They were still learning how to do it. So were we. We both made mistakes, but we both saw opportunities. And I think it's unfortunate that in the period since then, relations have gotten more complicated, not just with Uzbekistan, but with all of the countries of Central Asia, as the American government has lost interest in Central Asia, and the governments of all of the countries of Central Asia realized that the world is more complicated than they had thought.
What do you do now?
What do I do now? I do the things that all retired ambassadors do. I sit on not-for-profit boards. I go to lectures. I dream about going back to Uzbekistan and the other countries in which I served. I've stopped working.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you for being in our show.
Thank you very much for inviting me.